How can you ensure your students are learning what you are teaching them? In this video, we will share an array of effective strategies and techniques to help you do just that. Doug Lemov points out that the most salient characteristic of a great teacher is their ability to recognize the difference between I taught it and they learned it.
Dylan Wiliam, author of Embedded Formative Assessment, has likened the function of assessment for learning to that of a thermostat. A good thermostat, he says, knows the desired temperature of the room, measures the room's temperature frequently, and has a mechanism to bring the room's temperature closer to the desired goal, namely by activating or stopping the furnace. Similarly, a good teacher ought to 1. Have clear learning targets in mind, 2. Frequently measure the current state of their students' abilities relative to that target, and 3. Have the means to close the gap between the target and the current state. Without all three parts, assessment for learning cannot work. The goal of formative assessment is to collect data about learning so as to provide feedback to both the student about their learning and to the teacher about their teaching. Dylan's 5 formative assessment strategies are as follows.
Clarifying, sharing, and understanding learning intentions. Engineering effective discussions, tasks, and activities that elicit evidence of learning. Providing feedback that moves learning forwards. Activating students as learning resources for one another. Activating students as owners of their own learning.
What follows are examples of techniques that can be used for each of these 5 strategies. Clarifying, understanding, and sharing learning intentions. If you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. This includes sharing the learning goals with the students, but also what excellence looks like. For example, the teacher here is showing her class example of students' work from another class or perhaps from another year. Eyes on the board, this is an example of student work from last year. By the end of this class, you too will have something that looks like this. Let's look at what last year's students wrote and why. Engineering effective classroom discussions, tasks, and activities that elicit evidence of learning. The cold calling technique is meant to increase the number of students thinking hard in the class. Jennifer, what is the capital of France? By asking the question this way, anyone who's not called Jennifer can turn off their brains. By simply reversing the order of the question, what is the capital of France? Jennifer. More students need to think because they may get called. No opt-out is another effective classroom discussion technique. Here, a student will try to not answer the question. The teacher will say, what is the result of photosynthesis? Jimmy. I don't know. The teacher then says, that's okay, Jimmy, but listen to your peers because I'm going to come back to you and ask you to choose the best answer you hear. In this example, the teacher does not allow the student to opt out of thinking. If the student genuinely does not know the answer, they can listen to their peers and then summarize the answer later. Another good strategy is to increase the number of students participating in the class. Good whole class questioning techniques include voting with colored cards or with fingers. From colored construction paper, you can cut out rectangles that are credit card sized, and then students can use those to vote for their favorite answer. A benefit in using colored cards is that students may put up more than one color that they think is relevant. If you do not want to cut out construction paper, students can raise colored markers in the air instead. Mini whiteboards are another excellent whole class technique. Mini whiteboards can be used for multiple choice questions, like before, but they have the added benefit of being useful for other generative learning strategies, like writing or sketching. Think, Pair, Share is an oldie but a goodie. However, the point of Think, Pair, Share is not just to get students to talk. It's to increase wait time and think time. Here the teacher says, quietly, let's look at the question together. The students study the question, and then the teacher says, now before we vote, you have 15 seconds to tell your shoulder buddy what you think the answer is and why. By giving the class 15 seconds to think out loud with each other, better answers come to the surface. Moreover, students who aren't sure can hear what their partners think, which will lower anxiety. It's important to keep this technique short. Don't give students more time than necessary. because targeted and focused conversation may go off track. Providing feedback that moves learning forward. Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset tells us not to praise intelligence, but hard work. Another way of thinking about this is to give task-involving rather than ego-involving feedback. But beyond that, the kind of feedback you give depends on whether your students are novices or non-novices. What comes next are 3 examples of feedback. 1 example of what not to do, and 2 examples of what to do. Scenario 1. Sam just finished teaching her class about gravity. She does a quick check for understanding. In a moment, I'm going to choose someone to tell me why don't things fall off the bottom of the planet. Amy? Amy says, because gravity sticks things to the planet. Interesting, but that's not what I was looking for. She pauses for a little while and then moves on to another student. The above is an example of non-directive feedback. The teacher is hoping not to embarrass her students by saying interesting and doesn't want to give too much help, but waits to see if the student could fix her thinking. The problem here is that novices do not know what they do not know. Sam's student is lacking too much domain knowledge to evaluate their own answer, and may have been confused by the teacher's comment of interesting. Here, Sam should have said, "Thanks for sharing. That's a common misconception, and I'm glad you said it. No, gravity does not stick things like glue. Who can make this right?" After hearing the correct answer from another student, Sam should come back to the first student and have them now answer the question correctly. Scenario 2. Jason's class is answering a set of questions about photosynthesis, and as he circulates the room, he notices that a student has written that carbon dioxide is absorbed in the roots of a plant. Jason interrupts the student and says, "What comes in from the roots?" "Water. Good, yes. Not carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is absorbed in the leaves during photosynthesis. Make sure you review this for homework, because I'll ask you about this again soon." Here, Jason noticed a student with low domain knowledge struggling, and rather than playing the game Guess What's in the Teacher's Head, or 20 questions, Jason immediately corrects the student and instructs them to practice this more with retrieval practice homework, because there will be a checkup, likely in the form of prior knowledge check in the next class. Directive feedback of this kind reduces the chances that a student becomes demotivated as they fumble to make sense of the teacher's cryptic questions. Scenario 3. Jason has been working with his class for weeks on tectonic plates, and his class has demonstrated a lot of mastery in this topic when he checks for understanding. In a sketch and explain activity, Jason notices a student accidentally mislabel the Earth's crust. He interrupts the student and says, "I'm noticing a mistake somewhere in your labeling. Please look it over." Then he walks away. Here, the teacher knows their student has the domain knowledge and can find the correct error independently. Non-directive feedback is well applied here. Activating students as learning resources for one another. In a popular video on YouTube called Austin's Butterfly, kindergarten students are seen giving each other feedback to improve their work. While it's important to allow students the opportunity to practice giving and receiving feedback, the teacher needs to realize that students are often novices, and therefore teachers cannot entirely rely on this kind of feedback. Teachers must check the quality of this feedback. Activating students as owners of their own learning. Here too, the quality of self-assessment must be checked by teachers, because once again, students tend to be novices, and novices don't always properly self-assess. One interesting idea for self-assessment is called the exam wrapper. These are a set of questions that you ask before and after an assessment. The idea is to connect the students' studying activities to their success on the assessment. By thinking about how they study and what they know, they may be able to improve their studying and learning strategies.